Daring in the Desert, Chapter 16. Helen and Lilius were away from Algiers for nearly 2 months on that trip. While they were traveling, the work in the city was led by the other missionaries. That became the pattern for the years that were to follow. Lilius and one of her friends, usually Helen or Blanche, went on missionary journeys lasting months at a time, while the others worked with the Arab people in Algiers. "This is a wonderful day," Blanche said, not long after Lilius and Helen returned. "Imagine us having an Arab prayer meeting. We've prayed for them for years, and now some of them are coming here to pray for their own people." After the meeting, the women talked over a cup of tea. "I believe God will answer their prayers," said Blanche. "Nearly everyone prayed for more Arab men to come to our meetings, and I believe God will bring them." The other women agreed that God was well able to do that. And the very next day, 8 Arab men came, none of them having ever been to a Christian meeting before. That night, there was another prayer meeting, with only the missionaries present, and their prayers were all saying thank you to God. The next day, 3 Arab boys who had become Christians arrived at the door. "Come in, Mahfoud, Daman, Mohammed. Come in," said Helen. The boys came in and were given syrup sandwiches, their favorite, and a drink of tea. "Can we have some books?" they asked. "Well, of course, but I thought you'd read all the Arabic books we have." "We have," agreed Mahfoud, "but we want to give them to people who've never heard of Jesus, too." Helen sat down beside the boys. "Tell me what you're thinking," she said. Mahfoud was their spokesman. "We've seen you going from door to door along the streets," he explained, "and we've seen you giving books to people who can read. We'd like to do that." Helen was thrilled, of course, but a little concerned. "Do you realize that people might not welcome you at their doors? They might be polite to a European visitor, but not be very polite to you." "We know that," said Daman, "but we want to do what Jesus wants us to do." Helen took out some Gospels and gave them to the boys. "We'll be praying for you," she told them as they went out onto the street. "And be careful." Not only boys had become Christians, there was a little group of men too. They met with the missionaries to study the Bible and to pray. And there were also some families. One woman, her name was Taidam, made the little church grow in size quite regularly because she kept having babies. Lilius Trotter was a real adventurer. It was as if she could picture faraway places where no Christian had ever been and hear faraway people who had never heard of Jesus calling out. So it was no surprise when, early in 1895, she and Blanche were packing up for another journey, the longest and hardest they had ever done. When you think of Lilius and her fellow missionaries believing that God wanted them to tell the people of Algeria about Jesus, it would be helpful to remember some facts and figures. At that time, Algeria was the second biggest country in Africa. The United Kingdom of Great Britain is 94,251 square miles. The United States is 3,679,000 square miles. Algeria at the time was 10 times bigger than the UK and almost 1/4 the size of the entire United States. The borders of Algeria have changed since then, but remember that as you read more of Lilius and Blanche's travels. "Now, what all do we need?" asked Blanche as they prepared for their trip to the southeast of Algeria toward Tunisia. Lilius reeled off a list. "We'll need the tent, our camp beds, and our cooking things." Blanche laughed. "I'm not going to forget them, but what needs to be packed in the goat skins?" The women didn't use suitcases. They would have been very awkward when carried by a mule. Instead, they wrapped their clothes and books in colored goat skins, which could be tied in bundles and strapped to their mule. They carried as few clothes as possible and as many Gospels as they could. Of course, Lilius's watercolor paints and sketchbooks always went with her. "Where are you going this time?" asked Taïdem, who was sitting in the kitchen at Rue de Croissant, surrounded by her children. Lilius explained that they planned to travel for several months. "We'll go by train first and then by trap. After that, we'll mount our camels and head to the south, through the desert and over the mountains, until we reach big towns called Nefta and Tozur." "They don't sound Algerian," commented Taïdem. Lilius smiled. "You're quite right. They're in Tunisia, just over the Algerian border." Taïdem looked worried. "Will you be safe?" The missionary explained that God would be with them wherever they went. She then told Taïdem that they hoped to stop back by Oued Souf and Touggourt, where they had been before, to see the people there. After that, their plan was to investigate other places that they might go in the future. "How long will you be away?" Taïdem wanted to know. Lilius suggested it might be as long as 4 or 5 months. Taïdem patted her tummy and smiled. "There will be another new baby here by the time you get back." Lilius painted a lovely picture when she and Blanche were on that long adventure. It showed a farmer sowing seeds. In a way, that's exactly what they were doing. They were telling men and women, boys and girls, about the Lord Jesus Christ. And they were praying that little seeds of belief would grow in their hearts and minds and that they would become Christians. Sometimes that happened right away, but other times, just like the seeds in the desert waiting for rainfall, those little seeds took years to grow.